After my graduation, I quietly moved my grandpa's $1 million estate into a trust just in case. On Sunday, my parents and sister showed up with movers, smiling and saying, "The house is in her name now, you're out." Until they froze when they saw who was standing on the porch, holding the folder. But before that victory, I had to survive the betrayal. It began the afternoon I stood on the university lawn, gripping my diploma, while my family looked right through me towards someone else. My younger sister, Bella, was posing for photos 10 feet away. She hadn't graduated, but she wore a new dress that demanded immediate documentation. My mother adjusted Bella's strap with a tenderness she hadn't shown me in years. My father held the camera like a weapon, directing Bella to smile brighter, to turn left, to shine. I stood in my heavy black gown, sweating in the humid air, waiting for a turn that wasn't coming. I had become the invisible audience at my own celebration. The only person who would have focused on me was gone. My grandfather, Arthur, died 3 months ago, leaving a void shaped exactly like his coastal home. That house was the only place where I didn't feel like a blurred background character. The air there smelled of salt and pine, and the floorboards creaked in a language I understood. Arthur left the estate to me, a final act of seeing me. But standing on that manicured lawn, I realized I wasn't just grieving, I was being hunted. My parents finally turned toward me, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. They looked like predators assessing a wounded animal. They assumed I was still the same, Avery who swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. They thought I would disappear, leaving space for Bella to expand. They had no idea that their dismissal was sharpening my resolve. In my family, love was a currency I couldn't afford, but property was something they understood. I watched them approach, realizing that my grief was simply their opportunity. "Avery, honey," my mother said, bypassing a hug to pick lint off my gown. "We were thinking about the house." She didn't say congratulations. She didn't ask about my degree. "Since you'll be busy job hunting," my father added, his voice smooth and practiced, "we should probably hold onto the spare keys. You know, for emergencies. Just until you get settled." Bella smirked behind them, checking her reflection in her phone screen. They framed it as a favor, but the hunger in their voices was undeniable. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the cool metal of the house key. I could have argued. I could have screamed that I was an adult, that the house was legally mine. But I knew that arguing would only make them plan better. So I pulled the key out and dropped it into my father's open palm. His fingers closed around it instantly. I handed over the metal. But I kept the one thing that mattered. The certainty that I finally saw them clearly. 2 weeks of silence followed, which I foolishly mistook for peace. Then the phone calls started, dripping with weaponized concern. My mother didn't ask how I was settling in. Instead, she asked about money. "Property taxes are due soon, Avery," she said, her voice tight with artificial worry. "It's just too much for a young girl." She made adulthood sound like a drowning hazard. I stood in my grandfather's kitchen, tracing the grain of the butcher block. The siege had officially begun. The next morning, gravel crunched under heavy tires. My father didn't knock. He used the key I had surrendered, swinging the heavy oak door open, as if he already owned the hinges. "Just checking on the old place," he announced, marching past me without making eye contact. He wore his serious face, the one he used to explain why something was for my own good. He carried a clipboard. He wasn't visiting his daughter. He was inspecting an asset. He spent an hour walking the perimeter, tapping walls and frowning at perfectly sound structures. I followed him like a ghost, watching him invent disasters. The roof looks rough, he lied, pointing at shingles replaced last year. And that foundation crack. That's 5 figures. He was building a case against my competence. I knew the house was solid, because Arthur had taught me every inch of it. But my father wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for leverage. He finally sat at the kitchen table, spreading out papers that smelled of fresh toner. "We're worried, Avery," he said, his tone dropping to a whisper. "You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." He slid a document toward me. It was a proposal to transfer the deed into a family management trust. "This protects you," he promised. "We handle the bills, the headaches. You just live here." The pen he offered felt heavy, like a trap ready to snap shut. I looked at the dotted line, my heart hammering against my ribs. If I signed, I would be a tenant in my own inheritance. If I refused outright, they would escalate to open war. I needed time. "I need to read it over," I said, my voice small. "I'm just so tired." He smiled, mistaking my caution for weakness. "Off course," he said, patting my hand with cold fingers. "Take the weekend. We'll handle the heavy lifting after that." He left the papers on the table and walked out, his stride confident. As he drove away, I noticed he had left his phone on the porch railing. I picked it up, intending to run after him, but the screen lit up with a notification. It wasn't ethical to listen, but survival rarely is. I pressed play, expecting a message from his office. Instead, I heard his voice, recorded earlier that day, leaving a detailed voicemail for a local architect. "Hey Jim, it's Robert. We're moving forward with the remodel. We need to knock out that back wall for the studio Bella wants. The current layout is garbage, but once we get the deed signed, we can gut it." The recording ended. My stomach dropped, then hardened into something cold. They weren't trying to save me from the house. They were trying to save the house from me. I looked at the trust document. It wasn't a contract. It was an eviction notice. The silence I had carefully cultivated shattered. On a Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee in the sunroom when the front door swung open without a knock. Bella breezed in, followed closely by my parents, bringing a chaotic energy that instantly sucked the air out of the room. She wore dark sunglasses indoors and carried a venti light like a prop. "God, it smells like old people in here," she announced, wrinkling her nose at the comforting scent of Arthur's pine polish. She didn't say hello. Instead, she began a slow, critical circuit of the living room, trailing her manicured fingers over the dust covers I hadn't removed yet. My mother followed, nodding in agreement with every grimace Bella made. "It's so dark," Bella complained, stopping in front of the heavy velvet drapes Arthur had loved. "We need to rip these down. Let some actual light in." She spoke about the house in the future tense, erasing my present ownership completely. I stood frozen near the staircase, watching them ascend toward the master bedroom. That was my room now. I had just started unpacking my books onto the shelves. When I reached the doorway, Bella was already inside, holding a stack of my folded sweaters. "Why is your stuff in here?" she asked, dropping the pile onto the floor. "This room has the best north light. It's perfect for my painting." She looked at me like I was the intruder. "I sleep here, Bella," I said, my voice steady but quiet. I knelt to pick up the sweaters, dusting off the gray wool. My father stepped into the room, filling the doorway with his imposing bulk. He didn't look at the sweaters on the floor. He looked at the window measurements he was taking with a laser tool. "Don't be difficult, Avery," he said distractedly. "Bella needs the creative space. You can take the guest room downstairs. It's cooler anyway." My mother chimed in from the hallway, her voice dripping with that familiar, poisonous sweetness. "It makes more sense, honey. You're hardly ever here during the day with your job hunting." She walked over and patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a restraint than comfort. "Bella is an artist. She needs the environment to thrive. You don't want to be selfish, do you?" The word, selfish, was their favorite padlock, designed to keep my objections locked tight. Bella didn't wait for my answer. She grabbed the corner of the heavy oak desk, Arthur's desk, and tried to shove it toward the hall. "Help me move this," she commanded my father. "It's hideous and takes up too much room." I watched as they scraped the legs across the hardwood, leaving a jagged white scar on the floor. It sounded like a scream. They weren't just moving furniture. They were actively dismantling the only history that mattered to me. They eventually went to the patio for lunch, leaving a mess of samples and magazines on the dining table. I walked over to tidy up, my hands trembling with suppressed rage. Under a stack of fabric swatches, I found a rolled-up tube of paper. I unrolled it. It was a set of architectural blueprints titled Bella's Studio, Coastal Renovation. The date on the corner was from 2 months ago. They had been planning this demolition before Arthur was even buried. I called in sick to a job I hadn't even started yet. The blueprints were still burned into my mind, fueling a cold, focused panic. I dressed in a charcoal blazer, armor for the battle ahead, and drove into town. The law office of Sterling and Associates was tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner, unassuming but permanent. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I wasn't just running errands, I was defecting. I checked my rearview mirror 3 times, terrified my father's truck was following me close behind. It wasn't. The waiting room smelled of old paper and peppermint, a scent that instantly calmed my racing heart. Mr. Sterling didn't make me wait. He opened his door immediately, a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen everything. "Avery," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "You look like Arthur." He gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk. I sat down, feeling the weight of the blueprints I'd photographed on my phone. "They have plans," I said, my voice trembling. "They want to gut the house." Mr. Sterling didn't look surprised. He leaned back, tenting his fingers together. "Arthur feared as much," he said softly. "He knew your parents viewed real estate as a liquid asset, not a legacy." The validation hit me harder than the betrayal. My grandfather hadn't just left me a house, he had left me a warning. Sterling pulled a thick file from his drawer. It was already prepared. "He wanted you to have a choice, Avery. To fight or to fold." I placed my phone on the desk, showing him the photo of the blueprints. "I want to fight," I said. Sterling nodded, and opened the file. Then we execute the contingency. He explained the mechanism of an irrevocable trust. It was a fortress made of paper. Once the deed was transferred into it, I would become the sole trustee. The beneficiaries would be future generations, skipping my parents entirely. It wasn't just a shield, it was a permanent lock. "This is aggressive," Sterling warned, sliding a pen across the mahogany. "Once you sign this, you can't undo it. Your parents will have absolutely no legal standing to evict you or alter the property." He looked me in the eye. "It will act as a declaration of war." I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt good, substantial. I thought about Bella scraping the desk across the floor. "They declared war yesterday," I said. "I'm just fighting back." The scratching of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. I signed my name again and again. Each signature a brick in the wall I was building. With every page I turned, the suffocating pressure in my chest loosened. I wasn't the helpless daughter anymore, I was the owner. Sterling notarized the documents with a firm, rhythmic staccato. Stamp, sign, stamp, sign. It sounded like a gavel coming down on my childhood roll. When the ink was drying, Sterling reached into the very back of the file. He pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. "Arthur left this for today," he said. "He told me to give it to you only if you signed." My name was written on the front in shaky, familiar cursive. I took it, my throat tight. I didn't open it yet. Signing those papers didn't feel like an administrative task, it felt like loading a weapon. I drove back to the coast with the folder hidden under the seat. The house looked different now, less like a target and more like a fortress. When I walked inside, the silence wasn't lonely, it was strategic. I hid the documents in the false bottom of Arthur's toolbox in the garage, a place my father deemed too messy to touch. I was ready to play my part. The role of the defeated daughter was one I had rehearsed. Now, I would perfect it. The first test came that evening. My mother called, her voice sharp with the anticipation of an argument. "We need to schedule the painters for next week," she said, waiting for me to protest. Instead, I exhaled slowly. "Okay," I said softly. "Whatever you think is best." The pause on the other end was heavy. "Well," she stammered. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, Avery. It's too much work for you." She sounded triumphant, like a general accepting a surrender. Bella didn't call, she just sent links, endless streams of beige sofas and abstract art that cost more than my tuition. "This is the vibe," she texted. "Get rid of the old junk." In the past, I would have defended every scratch table. Now, I replied with a thumbs up emoji. I watched them construct a fantasy life on top of my reality. They were so busy measuring drapes they didn't notice. I had stopped measuring my words. My silence was the permission they craved. By Wednesday, their confidence had metastasized into arrogance. My father sent a calendar invite. Estate transition. He didn't ask if the date worked. He informed me that a crew was coming to help facilitate the process. It was a polite way of saying they were coming to purge me. I accepted the invite, even asking if they needed the gate code. They thought I was rolling over. In reality, I was just opening the door wide enough for them to walk into the trap. Friday night was suffocating. The house felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. I sat on the porch, listening to the ocean. A part of me, the part that still wanted a family, considered calling them. I could warn them. I could stop the humiliation before it happened. But then I remembered the blueprints. I remembered Bella throwing my sweaters on the floor. They hadn't hesitated to erase me. I couldn't afford to hesitate now. Mercy was a luxury. Survival was a necessity. The final confirmation buzzed in my pocket, late Saturday afternoon, disrupting the quiet. It was a group text from my mother. "We're coming Sunday morning to sort everything. Have your boxes ready. We want to be done by noon." It was efficient and cold. She added a heart emoji at the end, a decorative sticker on a demolition order. I stared at the screen until the backlight faded. They wanted me packed. They wanted me gone. They had no idea I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't touch a single cardboard box. Instead, I woke up early on Sunday and swept the porch until the wood gleamed. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, enough for 2 cups. One for me, and one for the guest I had secretly invited. I dressed in the clothes I wore to graduation, but this time, I wasn't sweating. I stood by the railing and watched the road. They thought they were driving toward a victory lap, but they were speeding toward a cliff. The morning sky was a flat, unmoving gray, mirroring the heavy stillness in my chest. I stood on the porch, my hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. The sound of the ocean was drowned out by the aggressive growl of an engine. My parents' SUV crested the hill first, gleaming like a weapon, followed immediately by a white box truck that blocked the sunlight. They hadn't just come to talk. They had brought an army. The tires crunched over the gravel, sounding exactly like bones breaking. Bella stepped out before the car fully stopped, wearing white linen pants that were entirely unsuited for labor. She looked at the house with hungry eyes, already mentally repainting the siding a trendy charcoal. My parents followed, slamming their doors in unison, carrying clipboards and a palpable sense of authority. They didn't look at me, they looked past me, pointing at the porch furniture I was using. "That swing goes first," my father shouted to the driver. "It's a hazard." He spoke with the casual volume of a man who feared no contradiction. They marched up the steps, creating a wall of noise and entitlement. My mother stopped 3 feet away, offering a tight, pitiful smile. "We know this is hard, sweetie," she said, clutching a sheaf of papers. "But it's for the best. The house is in Bella's name now, effective immediately." She tried to hand me a single cardboard box, unfolded. "You're out, Avery. We need the space clear by noon." Bella was already reaching for the door handle, her fingers inches from the brass lock I had polished yesterday. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." A deep voice rumbled from the shadows of the foyer. The screen door creaked open, and Mr. Sterling stepped out, holding a steaming cup of tea in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. He wore a 3-piece suit on a Sunday, looking like a judge who had brought his courtroom with him. The effect was instant. Bella froze, her hand recoiling from the knob as if it burned. My father stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in a comical shape. "Who the hell are you?" my father demanded, stepping in front of my mother. He tried to puff up his chest, but he looked small next to Sterling's calm stature. "I'm Walter Sterling," the attorney said, taking a slow sip of tea. "I represent the Arthur Miller estate, and by extension, the current trustee." He didn't raise his voice, He didn't have to. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My mother blinked rapidly, her gaze darting between me and the lawyer. "Trustee," she whispered. "That's not possible." Sterling opened the folder with agonizing slowness. The property was transferred into an irrevocable trust 3 weeks ago, he stated, turning a document so they could see the seal. Avery is the sole trustee. She owns the house, the land, and every item inside it. He looked at Bella, who had gone pale. "Your parents have no authority here. Their signatures are worthless regarding this estate." The wind picked up, rustling the papers in my mother's hands. Papers that were now nothing more than expensive scrap. "But we filed the deed transfer yesterday," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking. She waved her clipboard frantically. "We have the confirmation number right here." Sterling didn't even blink. "You attempted to transfer a property you didn't own using a falsified notary seal," he corrected gently. "That is not a transfer, Mrs. Miller. That is fraud." He let the word hang in the air, heavy and dangerous. "If you persist, I will be forced to involve the authorities." The color drained from my father's face as the legal reality finally pierced his arrogance. The driver of the moving truck had been leaning against the cab, watching the scene unfold. He was a large man who had likely seen every type of family drama, but the word, fraud, made him move. "Yo, boss," he shouted to my father. "We don't do disputed titles." He didn't wait for a response. He signaled his partner, and they climbed back into the truck. The engine roared to life, a harsh mechanical rejection. They were backing down the driveway before my father could even turn around. With the movers gone, the driveway felt vastly empty. My father deflated, his shoulders slumping as the anger drained out, replaced by a desperate, panicked look. Bella looked at me with pure hatred, her eyes wet with angry tears. "You planned this," she hissed. "You let us spend money on renovations. You let us think it was ours." My mother stepped forward, clutching her chest. "Avery," she choked out. "How could you blindside us like this? We're your family. We were just trying to help you." I looked at them. My mother's trembling chin, my father's defeated posture, Bella's childish rage. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I didn't apologize. I didn't shrink. I took a sip of my coffee, the liquid warm against the chill in the air. "You weren't trying to help," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "You were trying to steal." Mr. Sterling closed his folder with a final, decisive snap. "Please leave the property immediately." The silence didn't last. My father recovered first, his face flushing a dangerous crimson. He took a step toward the porch, his boots hitting the bottom stair with a heavy thud that used to make me flinch. "You ungrateful little brat," he spat, abandoning the patriarch act. "After everything we've done. We paid for your tuition." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is how you repay us. By stealing from your own sister." It was fascinating to watch the mask slip so completely. My mother grabbed his arm, pulling him back, but her eyes were fixed on me with terrifying intensity. She didn't yell. Instead, she let tears spill over her cheeks, a performance I had seen 1,000 times. "Avery," she sobbed, "we're a family. We don't use lawyers against each other." She walked closer, hands outstretched like she wanted to hug me. "Just tear up those papers, honey. We can fix this. We can forgive you." She truly believed her forgiveness was the prize I was fighting for. Bella wasn't interested in forgiveness. She stared at the closed front door, her obsession with the studio overriding her common sense. "I need my sketches," she snapped, lunging toward the stairs. "They're inside." She tried to push past Mr. Sterling, treating him like hired help. He didn't budge. He simply shifted his weight, blocking her path with the immovable grace of a cliff face. "That would be trespassing." "Miss Miller," he said evenly. "And since you threatened the homeowner earlier, I would advise against testing my patience." Bella recoiled like she'd been slapped, looking to our father for backup. But he was staring at Mr. Sterling's phone, which was now resting conspicuously in his hand. "I have the local sheriff on speed dial," Sterling noted casually. He was a good friend of Arthur's. I imagine he would be very interested to hear about the fraud accusations. My father flinched. He was a man who cared about reputation, above all else. A police cruiser in the driveway would destroy the image he had carefully cultivated. The threat of public embarrassment worked where morality had failed. My father took a step back, his jaw tight. "Fine," he growled. "If you want to play it this way, you're on your own. Don't come crawling back when you can't pay the bills." He waited for me to beg, to apologize. I looked him in the eye. "I won't," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I paid the property taxes last week. The house is solvent. I don't need your money." My mother looked at me, like I was a stranger speaking a foreign language. "But why?" she whispered, wiping her face. "Why go behind our backs? We could have discussed this." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised us all. "Discussed it?" I asked. "You showed up with movers, Mom. You didn't ask. You decided." I pointed to the spot where the truck had been. "You were going to throw me out on the street today. That isn't a discussion. That's an ambush." There was no response to the truth, because there was no defense for it. My father turned sharply, marching back to the SUV without looking back. "Let's go," he barked at the others. "She's dead to us." Bella stomped after him, shooting one last venomous glare at the house she would never own. My mother lingered for a second, waiting for me to crack. But when I just sipped my tea, she turned away. The heavy car doors slammed shut, sealing them inside their bubble of indignation. I watched the black SUV reverse aggressively, tires spitting gravel, as they peeled out onto the main road. They drove fast, running from the reality they couldn't control. When the taillights finally disappeared around the bend, the silence rushed back in, but this time it felt clean. Mr. Sterling exhaled, his professional demeanor softening just a fraction. "Well," he said, adjusting his cufflink. "That went better than I expected." He looked at me with genuine respect. "You held your ground, Avery." Arthur would have been incredibly proud. I expected to feel devastated. I expected the crushing weight of losing my family to bring me to my knees. But as I stood there in the cool ocean breeze, I realized the weight was gone. I hadn't lost a family today, I had lost a set of obligations. I had lost the constant, gnawing need to make myself smaller so they could feel big. My chest expanded, filling with air that felt uniquely mine. I wasn't an orphan. I was finally a free woman. Later that evening, as I sat watching the sunset from my porch, my phone buzzed on the railing. It was a text from my mother. I expected anger, but it was just a link to a family counseling, website, followed by a message. We're willing to forgive you if you seek help. It was one last attempt to rewrite the narrative, to make me the broken one. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I simply pressed block contact and watched their names disappear from my life. 1 month later, the silence in the house was no longer a defensive strategy. It was a luxury. I walked through the hallway without holding my breath, my bare feet quiet against the gleaming hardwood. The dust covers were gone, revealing the rich grain of the furniture my grandfather had loved. No one was coming to inspect the baseboards or criticize the lighting. The air smelled of salt and pine polish, not the metallic tang of tension. I stopped at the front door, checking the new deadbolt I'd installed. My pulse remained steady. The fortress was secure. Upstairs, the master bedroom was finally mine. I had moved my books onto the shelves Bella had threatened to rip out. The morning light filtered through the heavy velvet drapes, casting warm pools on the rug where she had thrown my sweaters. I didn't feel like a squatter anymore. I opened the window, letting the ocean breeze flush out the stale memory of their perfume. The room didn't look like a studio or a renovation project. It looked like a home. For the first time, I unpacked the last box without fear. I pulled my framed diploma from under the bed, wiping a speck of dust from the glass. Bella had wanted to hang a massive vanity-style mirror in the hallway to open up the space. But I had a better idea. I found a hammer and a heavy nail. I drove the steel into the plaster with a satisfying thud that echoed through the quiet house. I hung my degree right at eye level, covering the ghost of her criticism. It wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was proof that I existed outside of their narrative. I reached for the cream-colored envelope I had kept sealed on the nightstand. Breaking the wax, I read Arthur's final message. The house is just wood, Avery. The spine you grow defending it is the real gift. I tucked the note behind the frame, finally smiling. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts, but I didn't jump. I knew who it was. Mr. Sterling stood on the porch, holding a bakery box instead of legal files. Blueberry scones, he announced, stepping inside without scanning the room for threats. Arthur's favorite. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea from the good china. He didn't treat me like a distressed client or a child needing protection. He asked about my job search and listened to the answers. The dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the ward, I was the neighbor. As Sterling left, he handed me a final envelope, the official deed transfer confirmation. It's done, he said simply, holding the paper. I realized how long I had believed the lie, that I had to earn my place in this family. I thought if I made myself smaller, they would finally have room to love me. But love wasn't about space, it was about seeing. I looked at the empty driveway, where the moving truck had been. I didn't miss them. The absence of their judgment felt like the presence of peace. I walked out to the porch, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water in strokes of violet and gold. The ocean moved with its relentless, steady rhythm, indifferent to the drama of human estates. I took a deep breath, tasting the salt spray. My phone was silent, blocked and peaceful on the kitchen counter inside. I wasn't waiting for permission to exist anymore. I didn't just keep the house that day on the porch. I finally moved into my own life. unlocking the door from the inside.